One of the, how shall we say, issues with discourse about tabletop role playing these days is that a lot of the borders between styles and concepts and approaches have really been made hard and rigid in ways that, at least for me, when I look back at my gaming past, don't really apply to my actual practice. In some ways, this is similar to the distinction you may or may not have seen between people talking about playing old school, like the way they actually played back in the day, versus what we would consider the OSR, which is a lot of folks looking back at those approaches and formulating them in a certain way that is sometimes similar and on the same path as people actually experienced playing back in the day, but also in some ways more or less different sometimes. Slightly different, sometimes way more different. I was thinking about something when I was at PAX U, and one of the things I love about these conventions is you can really just get embedded into, in this case, tabletop gaming. And for those few days at PAX, you're sort of in it. It's all you're thinking about. You're in this little bubble, and all you just get to think about and be about is tabletop gaming. You don't really have to worry or think about anything else until, of course, you come home. But I was also reminded of this again when I was watching a game of Trophy Gold, which was at PAX. Someone had told me about it. It might have been Amanda P. Might have been somebody else. I don't recall. And I failed to kind of follow up and go take a look at it. And now I'm sort of kicking myself. The main part about this was the concept of how we use dice in games. One of the things that I think gets put in the sort of story games category of gaming approaches is the idea of the dice establishing the fiction. So in Trophy Gold, but not limited to Trophy Gold, you will roll to do stuff. And those rolls don't just determine whether you succeed at doing the thing you set out to, but also will establish the fiction that follows. So you may be in a cornfield and you decide to climb up on a statue to look around, and you roll a result that indicates some kind of complication. Well, now there's something dangerous in that space, might be what comes up. So now in the cornfield, there's a monster. The differentiator between, say, the OSR approach and this approach would be in the OSR approach, there would be a monster in the cornfield. It's just whether you see it or not, and maybe how close it is to you. But the realities of the monster in the cornfield are pretty much already established in some impartial way that is not at all related to the fact that you decided to come up and look around. You looking around may make you aware of it or not, but the monster is in the cornfield regardless of what you happen to do. In what would be established as more of the kind of story game approach is really nothing is set. And by going up there and looking, in a sense, that action and the meta role that you're doing to conclude that action establishes that there is a monster, if that makes sense. And I think I'm getting Trophy Gold's approach correctly. I apologize if I'm getting it wrong. I was merely observing the game. I wasn't playing, and I definitely haven't read the rule book. So if I'm slightly off base, I apologize, but if it's not exactly true of Trophy Gold, if I'm getting it slightly wrong, it's certainly true in other games, this idea, this concept of the dice establishing the fiction. Now, if we're talking about that in here on YouTube or in Discord, Reddit, wherever, this would get firmly routed into, oh, that's a story games kind of thing. That's a narrative kind of thing. It's not an OSR approach. It's practically the anathema of the OSR to have such a thing. With an OSR and in other types of games, right? The world is the world, and it doesn't have anything to do with these things that we're doing with the dice. The world is the world, and we just kind of discover whether our actions succeed or not and how that goes, but we're not establishing the world through the rolls. And then you have these other set of games where they blur or they totally change that element and say, no, we're going to establish the world through things like rolling the dice. And as I was watching the game last night, and I was thinking about this, having first started thinking about PAX U, I recalled that through my gaming history, I've played and run and been involved in a lot of games that had those kinds of elements, like this sort of role-determining reality that you might see in Trophy Gold. But I would have never, if you'd asked me 20 years ago, 30 years ago, as a younger person or as a kid or whatever, you're playing story games, that's a story game thing, that's the anathema. It's like, no, none of those arguments were there. I wasn't, obviously, there for a large part of this, there was the internet as we know it did not exist, so there wasn't even anyone to tell me that this is something I should not be doing because it's not OSR or whatever. I mean, it wasn't even the OSR at that point, but it was something that maybe I would call ad hoc gaming. And I don't know if I would consider this a third approach. I think ultimately, a lot of times we put these labels on things, and the labels don't really matter. And the labels don't amount to a hill of beans, but online, you'll find that people will attach themselves to those labels. People will defend those labels. They'll attack other labels. When in reality, it's all kind of meaningless. It's all about just getting gaming done. When I'm talking about an ad hoc gaming, maybe something you've experienced in the past or the present, but it's a situation in which you may be at somebody's house, or maybe you're in a car, or maybe you're just somewhere and somebody says, hey, man, you want a game? We might be sitting in a bar somewhere. It's like, man, we can go to somebody's house and like we're getting bored, nothing's going on. It's like, hey, man, why don't we go back to my place? You want to do some gaming? Sure. Yeah, let's do it. Let's go. Or you might be in the car or again at somebody's house. And this question comes up, hey, do you want to do some gaming? Sounds great, right? But we don't have any adventure to run. We don't have material. We, depending on the time frame, there's no Dice and Logos repository of maps. We're not going online and grabbing something on drive-through. We're basically just saying, okay, we're just gonna game. We're just gonna ad hoc. I'm gonna come up. I may have, if I'm running the game, maybe I have this cool idea I just thought up. Oh yeah, what if we played through a scenario that was aliens, essentially? Okay, yeah, that sounds really cool. It's sci-fi thing. All right, cool. Or something else. Maybe some kind of there's more of a fantasy element to it. What if we're gonna do aliens, but instead we're gonna put it in a fantasy concept, and instead of being on a planet, we go into a realm and things are going crazy and some kind of xenomorphs. Are they aliens? Are they demons? Whatever, that kind of thing. Like, that sounds really cool. But we don't have the materials. Well, we don't. Maybe we have character sheets. Maybe we're just rolling with what we got, right? If you're playing something like BX, you get pretty, you can roll up some characters. You don't really need to look at the books. Pretty much you can guesstimate or you remember what bonuses or the positive or negative modifiers that come with each of your 3d6 attribute rolls. Yes, spells, but you can kind of hand wave stuff away a little bit. You probably, especially when you're deep in it, have some pretty good knowledge of what, say, your first, second, third level spells are. Okay, we got that stuff. Or maybe you're just rolling dice and just coming up with a whole system just kind of on the fly. But what will inevitably come up is you're in a scenario, there's no map. There is no source of truth about the world. It's just all up to what is in the GM's mind. A lot of that will end up becoming either directly or indirectly influenced or established through rolling the dice. So we're talking about playing in, say, an aliens type scenario. So we go, okay, we're the Space Marines. Yeah. And we've taken that, maybe this is, I don't know, 1992 or 3, and we've just seen Aliens or whatever year Aliens came out. I don't recall. So we remember they had that big 4-wheeler sort of APC dealy. And yeah, we'd get out and I've got that light machine gun and someone's got the sort of radar thing, or that might be on the light machine gun. I don't remember, right? We got everybody going. All right, we climb out of the car and we go in, and now we're looking around, and the GM is painting the scene of, okay, we got this kind of hangar type entrance. And yeah, I think that on this level, and you guys know about this, is where you've sort of got your administrative offices and yada, yada, yada. There was a school and a playground, but it's all deserted. And okay, the whole 9 yards. And somebody will say something like, oh, hey, I want to check to see if there's any kind of access that we know we need to get down to a lower level. I'm going to see if there's any access to essentially a secret passage, though we might call it in the sci-fi. So we might call it like a Jeffrey's tube or something similar, somewhere we can access a vent or something else to see if we can get down, because maybe we need to get to some kind of, it's aliens. So maybe we got to get down to the science lab as we were told by the corporation. And hey, are there any sort of secret passages in essence that will get us to where, or at least closer to where we want to go? And at that point, maybe the GM might know and say, oh yeah, there probably are. Maybe not. But oftentimes you might say, hey, roll some dice, right? And then if you make the roll, maybe I go as a GM, say, there's definitely tubes around. And yeah, you're looking for one that leads down as opposed to leading, side to side or up, because we know we don't need to go that way. Sure, there is a tube there. It seems to be relatively intact. Maybe we add a little thing, but there's some slime or there's a nasty smell or whatever. Hey, there's no handhold, so how are you going to go down this vertical tube? And then we play on, right? We game. We do what we want to do is we game. That dice becoming the secret passage could have been, in this case, it's kind of a Jeffrey's tube, but it's the same function as sort of a hidden passage that was not on any map, because there is no map. And it wasn't established until we rolled the dice to look for it. That is a technique that's something that very much be on the sort of story gaming, I think, for the most part, side of the divide that we would find. But at the time we're playing with our friends, maybe now you might be doing this, that's not how we're looking at it. We're not looking like, oh my gosh, we've crossed some kind of secret line into story gaminess. And it's not a matter of the fact that now we're trying to create this narrative. We're not trying to recreate the Aliens movie. We're not trying to build into some kind of overall narrative structure. It's just that in absence of having maps and material, that what we do have is this concept of, hey, if you make the dice roll whatever it is you roll, then that die roll is both representing your ability to find something, but it's also establishing the fact that there was something there to find. We've essentially put them together into one roll. This roll determining that bit of story building that we're doing now, or world building, I should say. Now, we would never call that. Back then, it was like, oh, we're doing if someone asked me, what kind of game are you playing? Hey, we're playing Aliens. We're playing kind of an Aliens type game. We would never have said like, oh, we're doing this shared world building, blah, blah. Like, no, that term and whatever feeling is evoked by calling it a shared world building experience as opposed to something else, none of that stuff existed. All we're doing is making use of the tools that we have, which is our imaginations and some dice and nothing else. Given that, well, why am I talking about this? Well, one of the advantages of having these kinds of systems at your beck and call, in your pocket, if you will, is that it allows you to game in situations which you couldn't otherwise. If you always had to have maps, all your full backpack of materials to game, then that is obviously limiting when you can game to having your backpack and whatever full of materials. By being able to, which we did, was just kind of switch it on and off. Yeah, if we had maps, if someone had bought some kind of book that was all about all the cool floor plans of Aliens, we certainly would have used them. And in that case, if we had then looked for Jeffrey's tube or ventilation shaft that we could follow and it wasn't on the floor plan, we certainly would have gone with that. But we didn't have that. And instead of that being a barrier, we just said, hey, we're just going to figure it out kind of on the fly what we're going to do. Having made this realization, because it's something I've done all the time, probably not even that long ago at times where I've been caught off guard. It's probably something that we kind of do almost subconsciously. If you ever get into a spot in your game which has all the maps and all the stuff, but your party has gone off the maps, off the grid, and they're doing something, you may do this yourself without even knowing. And someone says like they're in a room or they're in a building that you don't have a map for, and they're asking if there's something or other, and you listen to the reasoning and you go, yeah, maybe that makes sense. You might make a roll to see if it's there and then make a roll to see if they find it. Or you might just say, yeah, just roll the dice. And then if they roll and make whatever challenge you'd set before them, you go, yeah, maybe it's there. So what I'm saying by this is you may come to games, some of these games that have some of these or that are in the story gaming camp, and you may look at some of those tools that they possess. And you may reflexively want to recoil from them as, no, that is on the wrong side of the calcified border of the OSR and story game, or whichever. It doesn't really matter which two games, but they can be useful. I find that having thought about this, how much of our actual play is not solidly in one camp or another, even if we don't realize it, but that there is some blurring. I am somebody who, if you ask me formally, what is my interest in story games? I want to try them. I would say, well, I've never really played one, which is true. Formally, I haven't really played in what I would consider a story game. And I'm interested in that way, sort of intellectually to do it. But when I look at it philosophically, I say, it's maybe not my jam. But now I'm thinking about it. I'm going, well, maybe I've been playing some things that are kind of pseudo-story games off and on all the time, because there were plenty of times when my friends and I would game and we didn't have the books, we didn't have the maps, and we would just kind of roll with it and use the dice to determine the fiction in the absence of the fictional scaffolding that was available. And this wasn't even that unusual an occurrence. And like I said, I've probably done it in games relatively recently that I've run when the party's gone off the map. Maybe you have too. And I guess I say all this to say that maybe we need to reassess some of these tools instead of breaking down and saying, which you often find, it drives me nuts in places like Reddit, where people will just shoot something down and goes, that's not OSR, that's not whatever. Look at what's actually happening, and you may find there's a tool in there or a technique or a mechanism that is not only as useful, but you might actually be using something like that already. You just never thought of it in that way before. It was just now that thinking about and saying, hey, this stuff that we were doing because we just wanted a game and we didn't have stuff, but we still wanted a game, so we did it anyway. We're using some elements that are part of a gaming style that formerly I would have said, no thanks. But actually, I've used those tools and I've used them forever, just not formalized. So think about it. Let me know what you think. Were there any kind of cool techniques? What did you do, or what have you done? And what will you do when you want a game, you don't have all your stuff? Do you just not game? I mean, now with the internet, it's a lot easier to say, like give me a minute to download a map or to go and grab something. But, back in the day, we just kind of had what we had. And if we were going to go home and grab all our stuff and then reassemble, we would not game. So it was a matter of, hey, we're just going to do it. I'm calling it ad hoc gaming, impromptu gaming. I don't really want to call it just because, I don't know, I think there's just too much baked in concepts if I were to say improv gaming, though, yes, you're doing sort of improv, but it's to the service of just getting the game done when the materials you have on hand don't cover the circumstances. What techniques have you used? I've realized that and I'm sure other people I played with, have used this idea of dice determining fiction when there's no other sources of fictional truth available. I'd be curious to hear what you've done. That's all I've got for now, folks. Game on. Talk to you later.